Hi everybody, this is Tracy getting ready to review the premiere episode of the new TV series Greenleaf that is airing on the Oprah Winfrey Network. Before we get started, I was told by someone that this was actually a adaptation from a novel. I've never heard of the novel, not sure if it goes by the same name or not, and I probably won't research it or go back and read the book because I never seem to enjoy books as much after I have seen a movie, or in this case a TV series. So let's go ahead and jump into episode 1, which was called A Time to Heal. After reviewing the first episode, the name probably should have been something more along the lines of Family Lies and Wicked Ties or something like that. But anyway, let's get started. The show picks up with Grace Greenleaf, who is, I believe, the oldest child, I know definitely the oldest daughter of Pastor Greenleaf and Lady Mae, and she's returning home after being gone for about 20 years, and it's her and her daughter, and they're riding in a town car, and the driver of the town car, he remembers her from before she left, and he's talking about what a great preacher she was and asking her, where has she been, what has she been doing, and Grace, she doesn't want to talk about it, so she asks the guy, how far is it to her family's home? And he tells her, it's quite a bit of a way up the road, which leads me to think maybe a mile or so. So Grace says, well, that's fine, pull over, let us out, we'll walk. And the guy, he gets out of the car, he's apologizing for upsetting her, letting her know he didn't mean to upset her. And Grace was like, no, it's fine. And she pulls out some money and she goes to give him a tip. And the guy says, my tip is included in the price of my services. And so Grace gets more money out, and then she presses it in his hand, and she says, well, consider it a repayment of the tithes that, you and your mom have paid into the church. And I was like, this Grace is going to be something else. And so interestingly, I thought it was funny that the guy, even though he had told her that the house was quite a ways up the road, he still pulled her luggage out. And, instead of taking it to the house, he gave her luggage so she could carry her luggage. So then the scene goes to Grace and Sophia, and they're standing by the lake. And the reason that Grace has come home is because her sister Faith has died. And we can tell, by the conversation at the lake, that there's some mystery surrounding Faith's death. And so they talk for a few minutes, and then they begin to walk towards the house. And when they get to the house, there's like a guard gate, and the guy at the gate, he's apologizing, saying that he thought that she was going to be in a town car. And at that moment, another guy enters the scene, and we find out that his name is Noah. And we can tell by Grace and Noah's interaction that the two of them have some form of history together. And her daughter Sophia kind of picks up that, maybe her mom used to date this guy when she was younger. So they take the drive from the security gate to the house, which Noah did tell Grace that it was about a mile. So I'm thinking, okay, this is one big piece of property we have here. So I'm waiting to hear about this church. It must be like a mega T.D. Jakes Potter's House type church, if it can afford this family, to be able to live on such a large piece of property. So when we get to the house and the family comes out and they're coming down these steps, and I believe there's red carpet on these Gone with the Wind looking steps that lead up to this house. And, it's sort of like the scene from The Prodigal Son in the Bible, where the father, who's played by Keith David, who's one of my favorite actors, and he plays the father, Pastor Greenleaf, and he's happy to see Grace, and he embraces her, and he's talking to her. And in the background, you can see the rest of the family members coming down, and one being Lynn Whitfield, another favorite actress of mine, and she plays Lady Mae, the matriarch of the Greenleaf family. And she looks to Grace, and she says, "Oh, well, are you going to say hi to your Uncle Mac?" And so there's some tension between Grace and the uncle. and she doesn't want to speak to him, and so she goes to her mother. And I have to get this quote correct because Lynn Whitfield wasn't playing with Miss Grace when she came home. 20 years or not, she was not happy to see her daughter. And what she said to Grace was, she says to her, and she says, "Promise me you're not here to sow discord in my fields of peace." Now, is that any kind of way to greet your daughter that you haven't seen in 20 years? But, honey, that's what Miss Whitfield said. She said, "Honey, listen, you can come to your sister's funeral, but we don't want no mess up in here." And so those two have like an exchange, and, it's obvious that whatever caused Grace to leave, it was deep. And so I'm looking forward, to getting to what happened there. So as we go on, the next scene moves to the graveside service, and I thought this was kind of funny because they are members of a mega church. They had a mega church, and you would think that there would have been like a grand celebration of life, but instead there was this graveside service, and it's just like a murky, dark corner. I don't know if they were in a cemetery or if it was land on their property where maybe they have like a family cemetery, but it was only the immediate family, and the father is praying over the grave, over the daughter, and you can just feel the tension amongst everybody as the camera pans around to everybody at the grave site. And the directing in this show, I can tell, is just going to be phenomenal. Even in the graveside scene, as the camera panned around from each family member, you can just tell by the expressions that they all have their secrets, they all have their story to tell, and the only commonality that any of them have is that they're not happy that Miss Grace is back in town. So I'm just excited about the show, if you can't tell. So one thing I did figure out is that even though they live on this huge sprawling piece of property, they all live in the house together, I think with the exception of Uncle Mac. Even though he's always at the house, he doesn't live there, but everyone else lives in this house. And so I would think that, if my parents had this large estate where you have to drive a mile just to get from the security gate to the main house, that everybody could have like their own section of land with their own home built on it. But no, they're all up in that house together, and Lady May might be a controlling mother, and that may have been her idea that they all be in the house together, but it just wouldn't work for me. And so we leave the graveside scene, and we have Grace, and she's talking. I think she's on the phone, and she's talking to her Aunt Mavis, who's played by Oprah Winfrey. And I love me some Oprah, and I love Oprah's acting, but something about her character in this show, I'm not really feeling the acting part. Maybe I can't figure if she's channeling too much of her character from the Women of Brewster's Place, and maybe a little bit of her character from the movie The Butler, but it just didn't feel authentic to me. Or I don't know. Maybe we'll learn more later on in the series as we see her more. But her introduction into the show, I kind of wasn't feeling that part of it. So moving on. The conversation with Grace and Aunt Mavis, it kind of gives us a little insight into what's going on with the show, but more will be revealed, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, so let's see if we can get this family tree down pat, because there's a lot of people here. Okay, so we have Pastor Greenleaf and Lady May, and then Aunt Mavis and Uncle Mac are the brother and sister to Lady May. And then we have the Greenleaf kids, which includes Grace, who we met at the beginning of the show. Then there's the brother Jacob, and they have a younger sister named Charity. And then there's Faith, who is the cause of the homecoming because she has died. And she's not, I can't remember if they did a flashback of her, but I don't recall us ever seeing Faith throughout the show. We just know that it's her funeral. So then we have the grandchildren, which includes Sophia, who is Grace's daughter. And then we have Jacob, who's married to Carissa. And Jacob and Carissa have two children, Zora, who's the same age as Sophia. And then they have a little boy who's never really named in the show. I don't recall hearing his name. And Let's see, and then Charity is married to Kevin, who's a little suspect, but we're going to let that slide also. And then we have Noah. And Noah, later on, we're going to be introduced to Noah's fiance. Her name is Isabel. So I think I just covered all the main characters. So when they get back to the house, they're having a dinner. And the dinner kind of goes left when Carissa strikes up a conversation with Grace, and she's asking Grace, well, what have you been doing over the past 20 years? What church do you belong to? And so Grace, of course, she's annoyed because she's kind of over the whole church scene. She tells Carissa that she's actually been like a CME member. And for those who aren't familiar with what a CME member is, those are people who only come to church on Christmas, Mother's Day, and Easter, the three major holidays. And so Carissa is just like, oh no, girl, you can't be serious. And so Lady May, she's liking this. Pastor Greenleaf tells Carissa, to lay off, and Jacob is like, lay off of my sister. But Lady May is loving it, and she's like, no, I want to hear this conversation. I want to hear what she's been doing. So those two start bantering back and forth, and, Grace is giving her philosophical reason as to why, she's a different type of Christian and why it's okay, to not be involved heavily in the church. So to divert from that conversation, Charity jumps up and she wants to let the family know that, she wants to be a preacher, and she's been working on this series about marriage. And the thing about Charity is she's like kind of annoying. Yeah, she's annoying. And she strikes me as, like she may have been kind of slow or neglected as a baby, and to, overcompensate, they spoiled her and treated her like a, little prima donna princess. And now she's trying to grow into her own. And so she's, trying to argue the fact that she should be able to preach this service, and they're, shutting her down. So then Grace tries to come to her defense, and Grace can't win with anybody, because even though she was the only person on Charity's side, Charity was like, girl, I'm going to need you to sit down and shut up. I don't need you on my side. I will be a one-woman show before I need your help, Grace. And so that was like funny. And so by now, the whole dinner is just shot to hell. The kids have been dismissed from the table. And then Jacob and Carissa, they leave. And Charity and Kevin, they walk away. And so there's only Grace and Uncle Mac left at the table, and then you can see the maids and the servants, the service staff. I call them servants because they were dressed in, the butler clothes and the maid clothes, the black and white, which I was like, come on, people, are y'all serious right now? So anyway, there's like a stare off between Grace and Uncle Mac, and then Uncle Mac finally gets up and he leaves. And I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I don't think Uncle Mac lives at the Greenleaf residence. I think he has his own residence because he actually left the house after the dinner. So then they leave the dinner scene and we go to Noah's. And remember, Noah lives on the property and he's there with his fiance, Isabel. Now, let's have a pause here to talk about Isabel, because I think what they touched on with the whole Isabel and Grace characters is they did a little subtle introduction of Black people and how they deal with skin tone issues. So we have Isabel, who's a beautiful dark-skinned sister, and then we have Grace, who's this beautiful, high yellow, I guess what they would call high yellow heifer back in the day. But so Grace is very light-skinned, long hair, and then we have Isabel, who's dark-skinned. And what they do with the scene with Isabel and Noah is that they kind of play into her insecurities, because she knows that Noah used to be in love with Grace at some point, and so now she's feeling inferior. And so to combat that, she offers to move in with Noah. And I think that is going to be, I don't know how the Greenleafs will take that, considering Noah lives on their property, so they're going to be shaking up in this house. And so then they have a scene where they're actually getting ready. I don't know if they're having sex. They were joking about doing fellatio. And so the scene kind of ends with them in bed together, and Isabel is getting ready to go down on Noah, all on the preacher's property, but okay. So we're back at the house, and let me check my notes. What happened after that? Oh, so then we're upstairs and everybody's in their suites, and we have these conversations. So Charity is telling Kevin, they're talking and they're watching some like bachelor show, and she's talking about that, so we know she's off in fantasy land and doesn't realize that her husband is a little suspect. But so that whole scene is creepy, and then he suggests to her that maybe they should have a baby, and then we have them getting ready to make love, all under the roof of their parents' house, which is creepy to me. So then we move over to Jacob and Carissa, and they're arguing about the way she treated Grace at dinner. And as Jacob is trying to put her in her place, she lets him know that, hey, Grace is back. They're going to want her back preaching at the church, and that's going to interfere with what you're trying to do. If she comes back, you're never going to be the next in line to be a pastor at the church. And so you don't want Grace to be here, and you need to be paying attention. And then she shuts Brother Man down by telling him that she really wished that his other woman, his mistress, whoever his boo on the side is, that she would stop texting so much and that he needs to get her in check. And I was like, Lord Jesus, is there anything that these folks are not doing? So that was funny enough. So then we move on, and it's the next day, and Pastor Greenleaf is having a meeting with a senator. And he thought, when we were at the dinner the day before, he was saying that he thought that the senator wanted to meet with him about the officer-involved shooting. And we also find out that the officer in the officer-involved shooting was actually a black cop, and he shot a black person. So they did a little twist to that. So what we find out is that the senator is actually there because he's launching an investigation into all these mega churches and trying to see if they're taking advantage of their tax exempt status and jilting the American public out of billions of tax dollars. And so now they move on to Sunday, and they're getting ready for service. And so Charity is actually she's the minister of music for the church. And so she's leading the praise and worship. And I had to laugh because she was not a very good singer. So now we know that they just gave her this role of minister of music, and they, kind of let her get up there and sing just to keep her quiet and keep her out of the way. And the other thing that was interesting is that this pulpit was humongous, and it was just like a stage. And on the stage, there were all these like ugly wingback chairs, and Lady Mae was sitting in a chair, and I guess Uncle Mac was sitting in the chair. I'm still not sure what his role is at the church. And then there were some other people, but it just was not the pulpit that I'm used to. So then we move away from the church scene, the Sunday service scene, and we have Jacob, and he passes by Pastor Greenleaf's executive assistant, and it's a white woman named Alexa, and then he tells her he needs to talk to her, and he pulls her into this room, and they begin to make out and have sex during Sunday service. And so we find out that Alexa is actually the side chick. So just mess up in the church. And so after he gets through tapping that, they straighten up their clothes, walk out, and he goes and slides into his little ugly wingback chair sitting up in the pulpit. And I'm like, Lord Jesus, ain't this a mess? So then Pastor Greenleaf, he goes into his sermon, and he's talking about, we know he's doing an analogy about Grace coming home, but he's talking about these old friends, and they go away to college, but then they find themselves back together. And so the sermon is really touching, and Grace is feeling it. And when they have the altar call, she decides to go up to the altar call. And so he goes over to give her a hug, but then here comes Uncle Mac. And Uncle Mac comes over and whispers something in his ear. So then we have this tender moment between Grace and her dad interrupted. And then he goes over to this other couple, and then he announces to the congregation that this couple have decided to sow into their destiny by making a donation of $50,000 to the church. And then the camera goes back to Grace, and even though she's made the decision to stay, it's not, to rekindle her relationship with her family. We see her look over at Uncle Mac, and we know that her only purpose of coming back is that she's about to get him for whatever it is that he's done. And then we have another scene, I can't believe it was before the church scene or after the church scene, where Grace actually goes to visit Aunt Mavis at her club. And that's when she was telling her about, all the changes she wants to make. And we find out that Uncle Mac is a predator, and that he's been preying on young girls in the community. And one of the girls that he's molested or raped was actually Faith, and that Faith may have committed suicide as a result of that. And so there you have it. That's the first episode. It was good, y'all. It was good. Oprah, Ava, y'all put y'all foot in it. Well, okay, everybody, that's it. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and rate the video. And I'll see you next time when I review episode 2 of Greenleaf. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.